After the close of the Future History cycle, a run of books exploring humanity's place in the universe over the forthcoming millennium, the Doctor Who Virgin New Adventures came back down to Earth in June 1993 to explore some actual history. Newcomer David A. McIntee spent a long time researching to keep the book accurate. Would he be able to keep a good balance of history and entertaining story though? No. Welcome back to the Library of St John the Beheaded, where this time we'll be opening up David A. McIntee's White Darkness. One of many books submitted to Virgin Publishing in the early years of the New Adventures, White Darkness wasn't initially picked up, with Peter Darvill-Evans not being keen on the author's original pure historical vibe. When the rate of publication doubled, however, the book was reconsidered and, at the recommendation of the editor, McIntee shifted the focus to include an alien threat. In his author's note at the start of the book, McIntee states, "As a mostly historical story, this book required a lot of research since I set out with the intention of giving Haiti and Voodoo society a fairer representation than is usual in fiction." Now this is quite clearly a very admirable thing to do. While he would also go on to write some more pulpy, action-led books, the author has become known for his deeply researched, heavily detailed historical stories. Here he even recommends further reading for those interested in the era in which the book is set. Which, I'll be honest, doesn't seem like something I'm necessarily going to do, mostly because, as with almost all of McIntee's later novels, his research permeates the text so much that it ends up feeling like a textbook in itself. I tend to find his novels a chore, as he doesn't have the flair for condensing history in an entertaining way, instead filling the prose with so many facts and details that any sense of momentum is lost. White Darkness is far from the worst example of this. That's probably The Shadow of Weng Chiang, a book so steeped in the intricacies of Chinese history that it's almost impossible to grasp the story of. But as with all of them, I end up coming out of the book so thoroughly bored in places that I've no desire to pursue the topic any further. Elsewhere, his commitment to accuracy is shown in the form of voodoo and zombie, using their Haitian spellings when spoken by those aware of them, and common spellings when said by outsiders, which is a nice touch. It will perhaps be of no surprise to learn that McIntee now writes non-fiction books on mythology and history. He had previously approached Andrew Cartmel with an outline for a TV serial called Avatar, but not had much luck. He claims that at the time of commissioning, it looked likely that Kadiatu would be the companion, which only confuses the story of new companions even further. The book's cover is one of the less successful in the series, with none of the main characters really looking like themselves. Although not being one of the most well-remembered books in the New Adventures, it does have its fans, with fellow author Andy Lane singling it out as a particular favourite. The story was given a prelude in Doctor Who magazine 201, in which a character called Richmond kills his father. The prologue gets its own prologue, a single page of italicised text. It speaks of aeons in the past when a race called the Great Ones ruled. Oh yeah, that's the other thing here, we have a heavily historical book, and also the first sign of Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos being written into the Doctor Who universe. It's one of the more commonly discussed aspects of the Virgin New Adventures, although it actually continued to be developed well into the BBC Books era. At times it can be very effective, the idea of a race of ancient gods, powerful and unknowable, from another universe, casting a dark, threatening shadow over the increasingly familiar cosmos, is pretty cool. But at times it's a bit weird and jarring having existing fictional entities simply pasted over Who creations. Also, each story treats them very differently, which is unintentionally quite faithful to Lovecraft's work, but doesn't make for satisfying world building. There's no concession to pleasantries when it comes to the history. The prologue is a brutal chapter from the perspective of a child slave stowed aboard a ship heading for America. It sets the tone perfectly. The history of racial interaction is one fraught with tension, cruelty and violence. As we get into the main story, the action shifts to Haiti in 1915. A rebellion against President Sam is in progress, the US Marines are on the verge of invading, and murder is commonplace. Hands up, who knows about this era of history in this part of the world? While later books sometimes cover more well-known periods, McIntee can't be faulted for picking important and notable events in history that have gone largely forgotten, certainly in the eyes of white Western nations. This is both a blessing and a curse. It shifts the historicals away from the bigger, more flashy and already well-remembered events, but also can just be overwhelming due to a lack of existing context. Without any real knowledge of Haitian history, there's simply too much for my brain to fully process here right from the word go. For all its historical stodge, there are attempts to make the book pacey. The action flits from one scene to another at a fairly rapid pace, although this can make things confusing in a book featuring a large cast of characters and an overwhelming amount of detail. Indeed, there's barely enough time to get a handle on what's going on before things speed off to another part of the island. After the events of Lucifer Rising and Deceit, and well, the pit, which gets a subtle reference here because it's destined to haunt us for the rest of our lives, the Doctor has decided they all need a holiday, because that always ends well. And of course, despite being proud in his ability to now control the TARDIS, he still ends up off course, landing on Haiti instead of Key West in Florida. Personally, I think I'd rather war-torn, zombie-ridden Haiti than Florida, but that's just me. Our key players are President Sam himself, a voodoo priest called Le Maître, and his dog's body, the eerily thin Carrefour, Captain Petion, a senior figure in the Sam administration, fully aware that the President's emphasis on dealing with white people would be what got him killed, Captain Heinrich Dr. Karnstein and Professor von Stein aboard a German U-boat, Colonel Mortimer of the US Marines, General Etienne, happy to do the most bloody work expected by the President, Henri, practicer of voodoo, Major Richmond, mercenary and bastard for hire, and of course our TARDIS regulars. Some of these characters have basis elsewhere. The submarine's crew are taken from the Lovecraft story The Tomb, except Dietz, who's based on a character Anthony Ainley, played in The Land Time Forgot. On a similar note, the eagle-eyed will note that Le Maître is French for the Master. As future novels show, McIntee is a big fan of the character, and one wonders whether this was meant to be him or if it was always intended as a red herring, but even the Doctor is slightly disappointed to discover it's just a coincidence. The American pathologist, Howard Phillips, gets his entire name, of course, from H.P. Lovecraft. Between the usual Doctor Who staples, the TARDIS is stolen, the regulars are arrested, they meet an ostensible one-off companion, dead bodies are found, Benny goes off on her own and gets captured, we get a growing sense of unease as the cosmic horror elements take form. An imperceptible form speaks out via a dream, something stirs beneath the ground. The Doctor finds a diary written in a very typically Lovecraftian first-person manner of horrors, including a disappeared friend heard screaming below the ground. Dead bodies turn out to still be alive. The interior of a structure features angles and shapes no human could have created. The Necronomicon even turns up, given by Aleister Crowley hilariously, as well as other Cthulhu mythos tomes, the Book of Ibon and Der Vermis Mysteris. The Necronomicon contains symbols Benny has seen on the planets Exo-3 and Veltrock, where they were measured as being billions of years old and believed to be references to the Great Old Ones. It's actually a pretty good piece of weird fiction. Stripped from the rest of the book, there's definitely the suggestion that this could be a strength of McIntee's. I shan't give a detailed explanation of the plot, partly because that doesn't make for the best viewing, and partly because it would take as long as reading the book, so dense is the narrative. For most of the book, it's difficult to work out who exactly is good and who's bad, and that makes sense in an era of political struggles, revolution and military invasion. This was never going to be a book with a single villain against who to rail. In short, though, over the backdrop of a coup, a presidential assassination, the US starting their military occupation of Haiti, Le Maître is using tetrodotoxin to create zombies, effectively a form of sensory deprivation that makes people incredibly open to suggestion, and the root of modern zombies of horror films. Somehow he's also managing to make them immune to mortal wounds, however. The German scientists and US mercenary are working with Le Maître on this. He's also controlling General Bobo's revolution to keep things unsettled there and allow his work to go unnoticed. His plan is to turn everyone on Earth into enslaved, mindless zombies with the help of the German army. Why? Well, because he's been in touch with one of the Great Old Ones, via the use of mescaline, apparently. The Great Old One can be freed at the right alignment of the universe, and that's approaching quickly. Thankfully, the situation in Haiti has also brought with it lots of explosives, and they are used to blow up everything and everyone, largely by Ace, but also by the Doctor. The Great Old One's body ends up remaining underground, awaiting the return of its consciousness, and who knows when that will happen now. Well, hopefully never, as later novel, All-Consuming Fire, reveals that this particular Old One was none other than Cthulhu himself. So a lucky escape all round there then. Unfortunately, Carrefour and Henri are involved because they want to rid Haiti of white exploitation, so a minor victory for colonialism there. Unintentional, of course, but a slight unfortunate reading. McIntee provides an extraordinary amount of detail in places, not just the history of Haiti and the real-life characters we meet, but just about everything else. The weapons people carry and why the type of anno made one uncommon in the field, the origins of the Creole language, information about the artefacts found in the museum, the geography of the island, the list goes on. With the amount of detail in the book, there isn't much space for references and continuity, which is refreshing. When on the verge of having his own body pulled apart, the Doctor does momentarily wish he'd built another K9 to help in these kinds of situations, though. Penny's hair is described as newly released from its dreadlocks, so they really were just a bizarre one-off thing in the last book. She's still trying to one-up Ace, or at least stop herself from being one-upped by her, suggesting a lingering tension between the two companions. She's fascinated by early 20th century medical equipment, and terrified at the thought of having to be treated by it. She sometimes carries a tricorder, mostly because McIntee wants to make as many different pop culture references as possible. Stumbling across the Germans' underground base and unable to exclaim out loud, she finds a pen and paper and writes "Bloody hell" in big capital letters. Ace spends the book dressed as some kind of space bounty hunter, all silk shirt and waistcoat under a floor-length black duster. Upon being threatened by a man with a revolver, she immediately prepares herself for a fight she knows she can win. This is new Ace through and through. She goes to call the Doctor Professor, but corrects herself. She pockets the first gun she finds, and later threatens to use it on General Etienne's kneecaps, elbows, wrists, ankles, and more imaginative targets. She does acknowledge to herself that she'd really rather not shoot him, but is clearly willing to should she need to. She does end up shooting Richmond, the mercenary, emptying an entire chamber of bullets into him before continuing to pull the trigger repeatedly, her killer instinct to a response to Richmond shooting her friend Pétion. Thankfully, he survives. Ace is appalled with herself and throws the gun into the sea. Is this the start of a nicer, gentler Ace once again? I think we all know the answer to that. The Doctor, well, having started the book in his season 26 costume, quickly changes into what would become his regular New Adventures outfit. Gone is the question mark pullover, thankfully, replaced by a straightforward cream-coloured linen suit, battered fedora, and a silk shirt and tie. It's probably the most basic, least eccentric outfit of any classic-era Doctor. He discovers the brooch given to him as an engagement gift in the Aztecs and decides to wear it. In what is clearly more than simply a moment of fanwank, he realises how embarrassed he was at the time and how much he's grown in the hundreds of years since, and is finally able to accept it for what it is. It just is a sweet little moment. The change in costume was written just to be for the Doctor's holiday in Haiti, but ended up becoming his permanent outfit for the main run of the New Adventures. At one point, Pétion notices the Doctor's eyes are grey, despite having previously looked blue. The Doctor took a medical degree under Lister, apparently. His hearing is much more sensitive than that of humans, which makes restaurants particularly revolting experiences. He's able to use a subtle form of hypnosis to get General Mortimer to do what he says, and he hints that he learned this from the Master back when they were friends. He describes it as an unreliable skill, which is shorthand for it only gets used when an author thinks it will suit the plot. It's time to start a new, occasional part of the series, Dr. Dwarf. Doctor Who and Red Dwarf have a fair bit of crossover in personnel over the years, most notably Mike Tucker, who worked extensively on the practical effects of both series as well as writing for Doctor Who's audio and book ranges. The TARDIS does actually appear on screen on Red Dwarf, just making them strangely tied together, even if it is just an Easter egg. And of course, Who writer Steve Lyons helped set up the Red Dwarfs magazine and co-wrote the various versions of the programme guide. Doug Naylor, main writer of the show since the mid-90s, recently revealed that Stephen Moffat once invited him to write for Doctor Who, only to have the evening's excessive alcohol consumption wipe the offer from memory. Outside of that though, there are less direct but equally compelling links between the shows. Red Dwarf had been on air for less than 2 years when Doctor Who was axed in 1989, and in many ways took its place for many fans, being the BBC's only real science fiction output away from CBBC for many years. The two shows, sharing a similarly low-budget, studio-bound aesthetic and, at times, sense of humour, there's definitely a comparison to be made. The other clear link is in inspiration. Many Who writers, especially in the Wilderness years, were clearly Red Dwarf fans and enjoyed putting in references to the show in the books. Red Dwarf fan site, archiving team and general multifaceted meme-generating machine, Ganymede and Titan, have long drawn parallels between the revival Doctor Who and Red Dwarf under the Dr. Dwarf umbrella, and so it will now appear here every time a reference pops up. In short, I've just spent several minutes talking about the parallel histories of two TV shows just so I can mention the fact that upon seeing the Doctor's new outfit, Ace exclaims, "Smegging hell, it's our man in Havana." Later, she calls one of the Marines Molecule Mind, which is almost certainly a reference to an insult used in the episode Crichton. Dr. Dwarf will return. The swearometer registers use of the N-word, reported as things the American Marines call the residents of Haiti, but still unpleasant to read, as well as the now dated term mulatto. We also have shit, pissed, arsehole, bullshit, bastard, all from Ace, even though she also uses phrases like dipstick. I genuinely admire David A. McIntee's dedication to historical accuracy. Even when events are played with a little to keep the story well paced, he always goes deep into his research, not only to ensure he's as accurate as possible, and given writers' common reliance on cliché-ridden pop history, this should be celebrated alone, especially when dealing with racially sensitive issues, but also to stick to the original remit of Doctor Who's historical arm of educating viewers, and in this case readers. The problem is, it rarely leads to an enthralling read. Starting out as a pure historical, White Darkness overloads the reader with all that period detail, and then a complex cosmic horror story at the same time, and the result is that the two simply distract from each other. The original premise would have perhaps been a bit dry, but would have been at least a well-written period piece. The sci-fi story might have ripped along at an impressive pace. Instead, what we have is detailed history derailed by prehistoric aliens, and weird horror derailed by lengthy stretches of local politics. It's a balance McIntee spends the rest of his Who career struggling with, although this time the two elements, separately, are maybe as strong as they will ever be. The full introduction of the Cthulhu mythos into the Doctor Who universe is also a difficult one, with the actual horror on display here truly excellent, but McIntee following the tedious pattern of so many weird fiction writers by tying it unnecessarily to existing work. Even putting aside the problematic elements of Lovecraft and his writing, I simply don't see the need for so many other works to tie into his pretty vaguely defined and contradictory mythos. Also, the generic evil German scientists are completely unneeded and only serve to densen and confuse the plot further. In the end, White Darkness is less than the sum of its parts. Excellent historical research, genuine educational value, very effective cosmic horror story, good grasp of character, but the result is a jumbled and frustrating book. But I do admire its scope and its lack of unnecessary edginess, especially at this point in the New Adventures. Favourite passages, then? Not many, as it's more of a functionally written book than a beautiful one, but a couple I noted down. Petion seemed disgusted. Ace looked coldly angry, while the Doctor's features, as usual, were unreadable. Following them, Benny forced down a sensation of nauseated surprise that a human cadaver could be spread out over quite such a wide area of flooring. In the console room, Ace jammed the interior door open before returning to the trolley. "Come on, I've got a lab set up inside, and I could do with your knowledge of local weapons." "Didn't think even the British Secret Service had this sort of thing," he waved around vaguely. "Oh, it's amazing what Q Branch comes up with," Ace replied. And that's it for this week. I'll be back in the Library of St John the Beheaded very soon, and as I've just about finished my series of Feature Sound of London videos, I'll have a lot more time for reading now, so hopefully soon will actually mean soon rather than 2.5 months' time, with a video looking at the next book in the New Adventures, which is the debut novel from Christopher Bewlis, Shadowmind. So I do hope you'll join me for that. The full introduction of the Thanks, Lovecraft, that word is really, really easy to say. The full introduction of the Cthulhu milk. Yes. I wonder what Cthulhu milk would be like.